It was 11:47 at night when I heard my son-in-law say my name in a way that made my stomach drop. I had gotten up for a glass of water, the way I always do when the house gets too quiet and my thoughts get too loud. I was in my robe, barely awake, padding down the hall in the dark. The light under the kitchen door was thin and pale, and I almost turned back, but then I heard it, low and careful, the way men talk when they think no one is listening. She doesn't have to sign anything herself. I told you, I've got her signature on file from the power of attorney documents. We just scan it in, match the font, and that's it. The title transfer goes through by Friday. I stopped breathing. It was my son-in-law. And the voice on the other end of that call was someone I didn't recognize. What about the old lady? What if she finds out? A pause. Then a laugh, low and dismissive. She's 67, and she thinks a PDF is something you print out. She won't find out, and even if she did, we'd just say she forgot. She's been forgetting things lately. My wife can back me up on that. My hand found the wall. I pressed my palm flat against it to keep myself upright. My own daughter, had agreed to say I was losing my mind. The house I was standing in, the one with the pale light under the kitchen door, was my house. It had been my house for 31 years. I had paid the mortgage with money from my accountant's salary, raised my daughter inside its walls, sat on its porch the night my husband died, and talked to the stars because I had no one else to talk to. When my daughter and my son-in-law had moved in 2 years ago, after his consulting business started to fail and their apartment lease ended, I told them to stay as long as they needed. I told them it was their home too. I had meant it. That was the part that hurt the most. I made it back to my bedroom. I sat on the edge of the bed in the dark and I did not cry, because I did not have time to cry. I had maybe 6 hours before morning, and I needed to use every one of them. Here is what my son-in-law did not know about me. Here is what my daughter had apparently forgotten. I spent 34 years as a certified public accountant. I built my career from a junior position at a small firm in Ohio to a senior partner at one of the most respected practices in the state before I retired. I understood asset protection, estate law, and financial fraud the way a surgeon understands anatomy. When my husband and I built our life together, we built it carefully. 3 properties, a brokerage account that had been quietly compounding since 1991, a safety deposit box at a bank across town that my son-in-law had never heard of, at a branch I had never mentioned, containing documents he had never seen, and the house. The house was not in my name alone. After my husband passed, I had restructured everything on the advice of my estate attorney. The property was held in irrevocable living trust. My son-in-law could scan my signature onto every document in existence, and it would not transfer a single brick of this house without the trustee's authorization. The trustee was not me. The trustee was my oldest friend, a woman named Patricia, who had been my college roommate and was now a retired judge in Columbus. He was going to try to steal my home, and he was going to fail. But I was not going to wait for Friday to find out how far he was willing to go. I want to explain why I had stayed as long as I had, because I know that is the question. I know how it looks from the outside. An independent woman, a professional, a woman with resources, staying in a house where she was clearly not wanted. The answer is not simple, but it is honest. My daughter is my only child. After her father died, she was all I had left. When she first came home, things were not bad between us. They were careful and a little sad, the way things are when a marriage is struggling and everyone is pretending it isn't. I stayed because I thought it was a rough season. I stayed because she was my daughter, and I believed, for longer than I should have, that the woman I had raised was still in there somewhere, underneath the tension and the cold dinners and the small humiliations that had started to accumulate like water damage in the walls. And I stayed because my attorney, a sharp man named Gerald, who had handled my husband's estate, had asked me to wait. We were in the middle of a quiet legal process, updating the trust documents, adding a layer of protection to the mineral rights on a piece of land in West Virginia that my husband had left me. Gerald needed 3 more months. I had given him 2. I had 1 month left when I heard my son-in-law on that phone call. 1 month was no longer an option. I opened my closet and pulled a canvas tote bag from the very back shelf behind my winter coats. Inside it, my passport, the trust documents, my brokerage statements from the last quarter, a prepaid phone I had bought at a drugstore 6 months earlier, $3,000 in cash, and a handwritten note with Gerald's emergency number and Patricia's cell. I had packed that Besaudi the week after my son-in-law had suggested, very casually, over dinner, that it might be time for me to have a cognitive evaluation, just to be safe, he had said, smiling at me with his teeth. My daughter had nodded along like she was agreeing the soup needed more salt. That night, the bag had gone from the back of my closet to the front of my mind. I put on proper clothes, slacks, a blouse, my good walking shoes. I left my phone on the nightstand because I was almost certain my son-in-law had looked through it before, and I did not want him to have a record of where I was going. I took the prepaid phone, I took the tote bag, and at 10 minutes past midnight, I walked out the back door of my own home and down the alley behind the garden my husband had planted, and I did not look back. The night air was cold and clean. I walked 4 blocks to the gas station on Meridian and called a rideshare from the prepaid phone. The driver was a young man who asked me no questions, which I appreciated. I gave him the address of Patricia's building downtown. She answered on the 3rd knock. She was in her bathrobe, 69 years old, with the unshakable calm of a woman who had presided over criminal trials for 22 years. "Eleanor," she said, looking at my bag and my coat and the hour on the clock. "How bad is it?" He was going to forge my signature to transfer the title by Friday. Patricia stepped back and opened the door all the way. "Come in. I'll make coffee." We sat at her kitchen table until 4 in the morning. I told her everything. She listened without interrupting, which was one of the reasons I had named her my trustee. When I was done, she folded her hands on the table and looked at me with those clear gray eyes. "You know this is attempted fraud." "I know. And the power of attorney he mentioned." "Is that the one you gave my daughter 2 years ago for the hospital forms?" "Yes. It was a limited POA for medical decisions only. It does not extend to property." Patricia smiled for the first time. "He doesn't know that." "No, he doesn't." She called Gerald that night and left a message. By 8 in the morning, Gerald had called back and was already pulling records. By 10, he had confirmed what I suspected. My son-in-law had made at least 2 prior attempts to access financial information about the property through a title company, using documentation that misrepresented the scope of the power of attorney. Gerald used the word actionable 4 times in 20 minutes. I stopped counting after that. I want to tell you about the first call my daughter made, because it says everything. She called the prepaid number Patricia had texted her on my behalf, simply to confirm I was safe. I answered, "Mom, where are you? We woke up and you were just gone." "I'm safe." "But where are you?" "We've been looking everywhere. He's been driving around the neighborhood." I noticed she did not ask if I was all right. She asked where I was. She said we. "I heard his phone call last night," I said. A silence that lasted exactly long enough to tell me she knew exactly which phone call I meant. "Mom, that's not what it sounded like. He said he had my signature on file and planned to use it to transfer the title by Friday. Which of those words would you like to interpret differently for me? He was just exploring options. He didn't mean. He said I'd been forgetting things lately. He said you would back him up." The silence this time was longer and had a different quality. Softer, ashamed, maybe, or calculating. I was no longer sure which one my daughter was capable of. "Come home and we can talk about this like adults." "I am talking to you like an adult right now. An adult who owns the home you're currently living in and who has spent the last 2 years watching her son-in-law treat her like an inconvenient piece of furniture." I kept my voice very level. 34 years of client meetings had taught me that calm is more frightening than anger. "Gerald is filing documents this morning. The trust protections on the property are being reinforced. Any attempt to access, transfer, or encumber that asset without my explicit written authorization, verified through the trustee, will result in immediate legal action. Gerald." Her voice went flat. "You've already talked to Gerald." I never stopped talking to Gerald. Another silence. "Mom, you're overreacting. I'll be in touch when I'm ready," I said, and ended the call. Patricia's guest room had white curtains and a quilt her mother had made, and I slept in it for 10 hours straight. It was the best sleep I had gotten in 2 years. The following days had a rhythm I had not felt in a long time. Gerald was building a case. Patricia was reviewing documents, and I was beginning the process of reclaiming a life I had quietly set aside because I had believed, foolishly, that being a good mother and a good mother-in-law meant making yourself small enough to fit in the space your family was willing to give you. I called my friend Diane, who was a real estate agent and one of the sharper people I knew. I told her I was looking for something specific: a condo, 2 bedrooms, good light, a building with a doorman because I had earned a doorman. She called me back the next day with 3 options. I chose the one on the 12th floor with a balcony that looked east, because I have always liked to watch the sun come up. The lease was signed on a Thursday. I moved in on a Saturday with 2 suitcases and a sense of purpose that felt, honestly, like something close to joy. My daughter called 9 times that week. My son-in-law called twice, which I found interesting. Men like him tend to retreat when they realize the terrain has shifted. The messages evolved from worried to pleading to something that tipped over into a kind of restrained threat. He left one voicemail that I saved, in which he said, very carefully, that he was concerned about my mental state and thought it might be worth having a neutral third party assess my decision-making capacity. I forwarded it to Gerald immediately. Gerald called me back and said, with audible satisfaction, that is the best thing he could have possibly done for our case. A week after I moved in, Gerald had something new for me. He had hired an investigator, a quiet woman named Susan, who had spent 15 years doing financial forensics for insurance companies. Susan had found things. The power of attorney document, the one my son-in-law had referenced on the phone, had been used 3 times in the past 14 months. Once to request property records, once to inquire about refinancing options at a bank where I had never had an account, and once, 6 months ago, to open a home equity line of credit application in my name, which had been flagged and rejected by the lender's fraud detection system but never reported. There was more. My son-in-law had been telling people I was unwell, not strangers, people in their social circle, people at his professional networking events, people who knew my daughter. He had a story, Susan told me, that he told with great feeling. His mother-in-law was showing signs of cognitive decline. It was very sad. They were trying to get her the care she needed, but she was resistant, very resistant. He and his wife were exhausted from caring for her. I sat with that for a moment. He had never cooked me a single meal. My daughter had stopped eating dinner with me 6 months ago. I had been doing my own laundry, my own grocery shopping, managing my own medications, and balancing my own checkbook the entire time I lived under that roof. And he had been telling people I was declining. Is there a record of this? I asked Susan. He wrote some of it down, she said. He was apparently considering applying for a caregiver tax credit. There are emails to a tax preparer with a description of your condition. The description includes symptoms you do not appear to have. Gerald, when I relayed this information, stopped speaking for a full 4 seconds. Then he said, Eleanor, I want you to know that this is now a significantly larger case than the property fraud. How much larger? Wire fraud, identity theft, defamation, potentially elder abuse under state statute. I looked out the window of my new condo at the morning light coming in over the city. How do you want to proceed? Gerald asked. I want to proceed the way I always have, I said, methodically. There was one more piece, and it was the one that had made me angriest of all, angrier even than the forged documents or the manufactured story about my memory. Susan had found a GoFundMe page. It had been created 8 months ago under a name I didn't immediately recognize, but the description made me go completely still. It was a fundraiser for the family of a woman with early-stage dementia who required increasing levels of care. The family was struggling with medical costs and home modifications. Any donation would help this devoted family continue to provide their mother and mother-in-law with the loving care she deserved. The profile photo was a picture of my daughter and my son-in-law, arms around each other, looking tired and noble. They had raised just over $11,000 from strangers, from kind people who believed a lie about me, from people who thought they were helping a woman with dementia when the woman in question was at that precise moment reviewing her quarterly investment returns with full clarity and no assistance. I called Gerald and told him about the fundraiser. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Susan already found it. I was waiting for the right moment to tell you. What do we do with it? That, Gerald said, is where it gets interesting. I want to be honest with you about something. There were moments, in the middle of all of this, when I sat alone in my new condo with the city spread out below me, and I felt the grief of it, not the anger, not the strategic satisfaction of building a case, but the plain human sadness of it. My daughter, the little girl I had read to every night until she was 9 years old, who had worn my shoes around the house and declared she was going to be a judge when she grew up. She had looked me in the eye at dinner for 2 years and pretended everything was fine. She had agreed to tell people I was losing my mind. I let myself feel that for exactly as long as I needed to, and then I got back to work. The plan that Gerald and I settled on was careful and entirely legal, and I will admit, more satisfying than I had expected it to be. There was a regional professional women's symposium scheduled for the 3rd week of the month, hosted at the downtown convention center. It was the kind of event I had attended for 20 years when I was still practicing, a gathering of businesswomen, attorneys, financial professionals, community leaders. Gerald knew the organizing committee. He made a call. They extended an invitation to me as a last-minute keynote speaker, billed as a retired financial professional with a timely perspective on elder financial protection. I also arranged, through a mutual connection, for my son-in-law to receive an invitation to a breakout session on small business recovery financing. It was exactly the kind of event he attended regularly, always looking for investors, always working a room. He would not miss it. The morning of the symposium, I wore a charcoal blazer and the pearl earrings my husband had given me on our 25th anniversary. I looked like exactly what I was, a woman who had spent 34 years being the most prepared person in any room she walked into. I arrived early. I stood in the wings while the opening remarks were given, watching the room fill with 300 women in good blazers with strong handshakes. And then, as the breakout sessions were letting out and people were flowing into the main hall, I watched my son-in-law walk in. He was wearing the blazer he wore to everything. He was scanning the room with that particular look of his, assessing, calculating, looking for the most useful person to approach. My daughter was not with him. He did not see me. The host called my name. I walked to the podium. The applause was warm and generous, the kind you get from a room full of women who have been underestimated themselves and are inclined to welcome anyone who appears to have come out the other side of it. I watched my son-in-law's face from across the room. First confusion, then the slow, terrible recognition. "Thank you," I said into the microphone. I spent 34 years as a CPA, and in that time I learned that the most dangerous financial threats are not the ones that come from strangers. They come from people who assume they know your situation better than you do. People who look at someone and see a liability instead of a person. I paused. The room was attentive. I'm here today because 18 months ago, someone I trusted began using my name, my documents, and my reputation to access financial resources that did not belong to him. He told people I was cognitively impaired. He attempted to forge my signature on a property transfer. He raised $11,000 from generous strangers by claiming I needed care that I did not need and that he was not providing. The murmur that moved through the room was immediate. That person is my son-in-law, and he is in this room right now. 300 heads turned. My son-in-law did not run. I will give him that. He stood very still, his face the color of old newspaper, while the room located him and understood. I looked at him steadily. I want you to know that Gerald has filed. The trust documents have been reinforced. The GoFundMe has been frozen pending investigation. And every email you sent your tax preparer describing my supposed symptoms has been submitted to the state attorney's office. He took one step backward, then stopped. An older woman near the front of the room stood up. How long did this go on? 2 years, I said. Because I believed, for too long, that the people who claimed to love me were acting in good faith. That was my mistake. It will not happen again. The applause started in the back of the room and moved forward. He left before I finished speaking. He walked out through the side door without looking back, and I watched him go. And I felt something I had not expected. Not triumph. Something quieter, something that felt more like relief. After the event, a journalist named Carol, who covered financial crimes for the regional paper, approached me with a card and a recorder. Would you be willing to tell your full story? Yes, I said. That's exactly why I'm here. The article ran on a Tuesday. By Thursday, it had been picked up by 2 national outlets. By Friday, my phone, the real one, had 43 voicemails, and my inbox had messages from women across the country telling me their own versions of the same story, the same quiet accumulation of small humiliations, The same gradual erasure, the same moment when they realized the people they had opened their homes to were treating them like a problem to be managed rather than a person to be loved. My son-in-law had hired an attorney. His attorney sent Gerald a letter arguing that his actions had been taken in good faith, out of concern for my welfare, and that any misunderstanding about the scope of the power of attorney had been exactly that, a misunderstanding. Gerald read me the letter over the phone. When he finished, he said, "Do you want to know what I find most interesting about this response? Tell me." He doesn't deny the GoFundMe. My daughter came to see me 3 weeks after the symposium. She called first, which I appreciated. She asked if she could come to my condo, and I said yes. I made coffee and I sat across from her at my kitchen table, the same table I had bought at an estate sale in 2003 and which had come with me from the house. And I looked at my daughter's face. She looked tired. She looked like someone who had been telling a story for a long time and had recently begun to realize she didn't believe it herself. "I didn't know about the GoFundMe," she said. "I need you to know that." "I believe you," I said. I had thought about it, and I did. "The rest of it," she started, then stopped. "Some of it I knew. Some of it I told myself was okay because I was scared. We were losing money, and he kept saying we'd lose the house, and I." She stopped again. "That's not an excuse. I know that's not an excuse." I looked at my daughter for a long moment. "It's not an excuse," I agreed. "But it is a reason, and I can work with a reason." She looked up. "This is not fixed," I said clearly. "What happened is not something I'm going to let go of in an afternoon over coffee." He attempted to steal from me. He lied about my mental health. He used my name. That has legal consequences that are already in motion, and I am not going to interfere with them. I held her gaze. "But you are my daughter, and if you are willing to do the actual work of understanding what you allowed to happen and why, I am willing to have that conversation. Not today, not next month, but eventually." She nodded. Her eyes were wet. "What are you going to do now?" she asked. "With the house? I'm going to sell it," I said. "I've wanted a smaller place for years. This condo suits me better. And the money? Mine. To do with as I choose." I picked up my coffee cup. "I'm thinking about funding a financial literacy program for senior women. Something practical. How to structure assets. How to recognize coercive control. How to make sure the people you love cannot use your trust against you." I set the cup down. I should have had access to something like that before I made the choices I made 2 years ago. My son-in-law, in the end, did not go to prison, though he came closer to it than his attorney had led him to believe he would. He pled to a reduced charge, paid a significant fine, performed community service, and was required to make full restitution to everyone who had donated to the GoFundMe. His consulting work had already fallen apart. My daughter, quietly, filed for separation 6 months later. I did not tell her to do it. I did not tell her not to. The house sold in 11 days. The proceeds went into the trust, where they joined everything else my husband and I had built together, growing in the patient way that money grows when careful people leave it alone. On the first morning in my condo that felt entirely like mine, I made coffee and took it out to the balcony. The sun was coming up over the rooftops, the way it does in early spring when the light is still thin, but already full of intention. I thought about the woman who had walked out of that house at midnight with a canvas tote bag and a plan she had not yet fully formed. I thought about how frightened she had been, underneath the practical thinking, underneath the clear-headed assessment of documents and attorneys and trust structures, frightened in the way that only happens when someone you loved has chosen something other than you. I was not frightened anymore. I had a letter on my desk from a woman in Arizona who had read the article and recognized her own situation in mine. She was 64. Her son and his wife had moved in 2 years ago. Things had started to shift. Small things, comments, exclusions, the way her name had slowly stopped being used, replaced by she and her, and once, that word again, burden. I had written back to her the night before. I had given her Gerald's number and told her about the trust structure my husband and I had used. I had told her the thing that no one had told me before I needed to know it. You are not a burden for existing. You are not a problem to be managed. Your presence in your own life is not an inconvenience. And the moment someone in your family begins to treat it as one, that is information. Trust it and then make your plan. The sun finished rising. I refilled my coffee and went back inside. I had a meeting with the program director of the Women's Financial Center at 10, and I needed to review the curriculum outline before I arrived. I sat at my kitchen table with the papers spread in front of me and the city bright behind the window glass, and I thought about something my husband used to say. He said it whenever one of my clients came to us after a financial disaster, panicked and ashamed, convinced they had lost everything. He would sit across from them, and he would look them in the eye, and he would say, calmly, the way you speak to someone who needs to hear the most important thing very clearly. What you know now is worth more than what you lost. I had been slow to learn what I needed to know. I had been patient when I should have been clear, accommodating when I should have been firm, forgiving of small things until the small things became something I could not forgive. But I knew it now. I knew it down to my bones. The way you know things that cost you something real to learn. And I was not done yet. Not by a long distance. My name is Eleanor. I am 67 years old. I am a retired CPA, a property owner, a trust beneficiary, a friend, a mother, and the founding chair of a financial protection program that, by the end of its first year, will have served over 300 senior women in 5 states. I am not a burden. I am the woman they underestimated, and I intend to keep proving exactly how costly that mistake was, one life at a time, for as long as I have breath in my body and coffee in my cup, which, I can promise you, is going to be quite a while yet.